When the evidence bag hits the table, the courtroom goes quiet. Inside it are not just financial records, but also the one thing that could destroy the Brown family forever. And Sister Wives fans think they know the truth, but what happens next will show that everything was a lie. You may have seen drama before, but wait until this case is over. You'll have to pick a side by the end. So, who do you trust right now? The camera follows the heavy wooden doors as they slowly open. Inside, the courtroom feels colder than expected, sterile, tense, almost suffocating. Kody Brown sits at the defense table, fingers interlocked, jaw tight. He doesn't seem as sure of himself as he usually does. Janelle Brown, who is sitting across from him, doesn't even look at him. She stands up straight and calm, but her eyes show years of silence that are finally ready to speak. Christine Brown leans slightly forward with her arms crossed, watching everything happen as if she had been waiting for this moment. Meri Brown sits still and unreadable, while Robyn Brown holds a tissue and is already upset before the trial even starts. The judge calls the room to order. This isn't just a fight between family members anymore, this is a court case. Janelle and Kody, property, cash, betrayal, and something much deeper that no one saw coming. The prosecutor stands up slowly and adjusts his glasses. Your Honor, this case is about lying, manipulating money, and emotional coercion over a long period of time. Kody lets out a sharp breath and shakes his head. But Janelle stays still. Not even a blink. The story doesn't begin here. It starts years before that at Coyote Pass, the place that was supposed to bring them all together. Flashback. The sun is going down over the property and the empty land is bathed in golden light. Kody stands in the middle with his arms outstretched, painting a picture. We're making a name for ourselves here, he says. A place for everyone. Janelle watches him carefully. She trusts him, maybe more than anyone else ever did. Christine doesn't look sure. Meri looks unsure. But what about Robyn? She nods and stands next to Kody. And that's when the imbalance starts to happen. Money starts moving. Changes in investments. People make decisions, but not all of them are the same. Janelle does a lot to help. She sacrifices stability. She has faith in the process. But over time, something feels off. Documents she never fully sees, plans that change without her saying anything. And one day, she realizes she doesn't actually own what she thought she did. Back to now. The prosecutor puts a pile of papers in front of the judge. He says, these are property agreements that were signed under false pretenses. Kody leans in. That's not true. But his voice doesn't sound sure. Janelle finally lifts her head. When she does, though, it's not anger. It's something colder. It is true, she says quietly. The room stops moving. Robyn even stops crying. The lawyer for the defense stands up and walks around slowly. He starts by saying, let's not forget that this was a plural marriage. Shared finances, shared responsibilities. No one was forced. He looks at Janelle. You made your choices on purpose, didn't you? There is a break. A long one. Janelle takes a breath. Yes, she says, I did. Kody nods a little as if to say, okay, but she keeps going. I chose to trust. That hits harder than anything else. Christine's lips are pressed together, keeping her feelings in check. Meri shifts uncomfortably, and Robyn looks down. The prosecutor steps forward again. Did you ever feel like you had to put the family's financial goals ahead of your own safety? This time, Janelle doesn't hesitate. Yes. Kody laughs. That's crazy. The judge lifts a hand. Mr. Brown, it's your turn. But Kody can't keep quiet. She's rewriting history, he says under his breath. Now Janelle is completely facing him. No, she says. I'm finally telling it. Be quiet. Heavy. Not possible to avoid. Someone is called to testify. Christine. She walks to the stand with a calm but determined look on her face. She never looks at Kody. Miss Brown, the prosecutor begins, can you describe the financial structure within the family? Christine lets out a small breath. It wasn't fair, she says. Kody moves around in his chair. Some voices were more important. It's clear what this means. Whose voice, who? The prosecutor asks. Christine thinks for a second, but then she does it. Robyn's. Everyone looks. Robyn's face immediately tightens. That's not fair, she says in a low voice, but Christine keeps going. Decisions began to center on her home. Also, resources. Kody shakes his head. That's not true. Christine finally turns to him, and there is no more softness. Yes, she says, the stress gets to be too much to handle. Meri seems to be stuck in the middle. Robyn starts to cry again. And Kody looks like he's been caught. He doesn't have control of the story for the first time. The prosecutor comes back to the table and picks up the bag of evidence. He says, Your Honor, we would like to show Exhibit 12. Inside, money transfers. Big ones. Again and again. And all of them going to the same place. Robyn's home. Gasps go through the courtroom. Kody stands up quickly. That's not what I meant. The judge hits the gavel. Mr. Brown, please sit down. Janelle watches without saying anything. Not shocked, not even happy. Just done. The prosecutor is now speaking clearly. These deals were made without everyone knowing everything about them. He stops. And they directly contradict previous statements made under oath. People start to whisper in the room. Christine puts her hand over her mouth. Meri looks shocked. Robyn shakes her head and cries more. Kody sits down slowly, defeated or trapped. It's hard to say. But one thing is clear. This isn't just a case of not talking. This is a lot bigger than that. Something on purpose. It feels like something has already happened in the courtroom that can't be undone, and everyone knows it. Kody sits still, his earlier confidence gone. Instead, he is getting more and more tense, which shows in the way his fingers tap on the table. Janelle is still across from him, but something has changed about her. She's not just defending herself anymore, she's revealing something that has been hidden for years. The prosecutor steps forward again. His voice is steady but sharper this time, as if he knows how serious things are about to get. Your Honor, the financial records we've just given you are only part of the story. Kody lets out a loud breath and shakes his head as if to say that everything is unimportant, but his eyes dart to Robyn for a second, and that look doesn't go unnoticed. Janelle notices it. Christine sees it. It looks like the jury even sees the silent exchange. The prosecutor goes on to give a timeline that goes back years, showing how money was moved around, how decisions were quietly changed, and how some family members were left out of important talks. Miss Brown, he says, turning to Janelle, when did you first know something was wrong? There is a pause, and for the first time, Janelle's calmness breaks a little, not with anger, but with the weight of her memories. It wasn't one moment, she says in a soft voice. It was a pattern. The camera in your mind shifts to another flashback, this time to the early days at Coyote Pass, but the mood is different. The thrill has faded, and now there is only confusion. Janelle stands with a stack of papers in her hands and a furrowed brow as she looks over numbers that don't add up. Kody, this isn't what we agreed on, she says in a calm but firm voice. Kody hardly looks at the papers. He says plans change, without much thought. We have to be flexible, but Janelle doesn't move. Flexible doesn't mean invisible, she says, and there is a tension in the room that no one talks about. In the courtroom again, the prosecutor puts another document on the screen. This one shows a big deal that changed the percentages of ownership. This transfer, he says, happened without Miss Janelle Brown's signed consent. The defense lawyer stands up right away. Objection, context is missing. Overruled, the judge says quickly, looking at the evidence. Kody can't keep quiet anymore and leans forward. He says, she knew about it, and his voice gets louder. But Janelle looks at him again, and this time her voice is stronger. I knew something was going on, she says. I didn't know what. That difference hits hard and echoes through the room in a way that Kody can't stop. And just like that, The idea of trust in this family starts to break down completely. The prosecutor nods slightly and then turns. "Let's talk about how we talk to each other," he says. Or the lack of it. He asks for another witness. Meri. Everyone in the room seems to hold their breath as she slowly stands up and walks to the stand. Her face is guarded and her steps are careful, as if she knows that what she says could change everything. She swears an oath, sits down, and puts her hands together in her lap. "Miss Brown," the prosecutor says, "did you know about the money decisions being made about Coyote Pass?" Meri stops for a moment, her eyes darting between Kody and Janelle before going back down. "Not completely," she says. "There were talks, but no clarity," the prosecutor says as he leans in. "Did you ever think that information was being kept from you?" Another break. This time, it's longer. The tension is so high that it almost breaks. "Yes," Meri finally says. The word is quiet, but it hits like a wave. Kody shakes his head right away. He whispers, "That's not true, but the damage is already done." Christine closes her eyes for a second, as if she hears something she has always known but never heard someone say. Robyn's crying has changed into something else, something more defensive and anxious. The prosecutor steps back and waits for the silence to settle before making the next move. Was there a point where you felt certain individuals had more influence over decisions than others? Meri swallows hard. Yes. Who? The question hangs in the air like a loaded trigger. Meri's voice shakes a little. Kody and Robyn. Robyn looks up right away, shakes her head, and starts crying again. She whispers, "That's not fair," but her voice isn't as sure as it was before. Kody leans back in his chair and runs a hand through his hair, looking very upset. "This is being twisted," he says, this time louder. But the court doesn't act the same way it used to. There is no sympathy, not an agreement, just watching. And for the first time, it seems like the truth isn't just coming out, it's being confirmed from all sides. The lawyer for the defense quickly steps in to try to take back control. "Let's not forget," he says to the jury, "this is a complicated family situation. Feelings can change how you see things." He looks at Meri. "You were in on every important conversation, right?" Meri hesitates again, but this time it feels different. She's not unsure, she's torn. "I was there," she says carefully. That line, "but being there isn't the same as being heard," changes the mood of the room. Even the judge looks up more intently now. Kody's face tightens even more, and his anger turns into something more like panic. The defense lawyer stops for a moment, clearly confused, before trying a different approach. "And yet, you never formally objected to these decisions at the time, right?" Meri looks down and tightens her hands together. She says, "No." The defense lawyer nods a little, as if he has gained ground. But then Meri says, "Because I didn't think it would matter." The silence that follows is deafening. Kody looks at her in shock, as if this is the first time he's heard her say it out loud. Christine watches with a mix of sadness and confirmation. Janelle doesn't say anything, but her posture changes slightly, as if another piece of the truth has just fallen into place. And now, the courtroom isn't just hearing accusations, it's witnessing years of silence finally breaking. The prosecutor steps up one last time. His voice is lower now, but it is stronger. "We'd like to call one last witness for today, Your Honor." The room goes quiet. Even the faint sounds of movement seem to go away. We call Robyn Brown. The reaction is immediate. Robyn's head snaps up and her eyes are wide with shock. "Me?" she asks quietly, as if she hopes she heard wrong. Kody turns to her right away. "You don't have to," she does, the judge says firmly. Robyn slowly gets up, her hands shaking as she walks to the stand. Each step feels heavier than the last, like she knows this moment has been coming but hoped it never would. She sits down, takes the oath, and doesn't look at anyone, especially Kody. The prosecutor approaches carefully, almost gently. "Miss Brown," he says, "can you tell me what part you played in making the financial decisions about Coyote Pass?" Robyn shakes her head a little, already feeling sad. "I didn't control anything," she says quickly. "I just supported my husband." The prosecutor nods as if he knew that was the answer. "And yet," he says, holding up the financial records again, "these transactions all lead back to your household." Robyn's heart starts to race. "That's not how it looks, then help us understand how it is," the prosecutor says in a calm voice. The room leans in, every eye fixed on her. This time, Kody doesn't even say anything. Robyn's voice breaks. She says, "Kody made the choices. I trusted him." The prosecutor tilts his head a little. "So you're saying you had no influence?" Another break. Another time when everything could change. Robyn hesitates, and in that moment of doubt, something happens. Because it seems like she doesn't even know what the truth is anymore. She looks at Kody. He stares back at her, intense, almost pleading without saying a word. That quiet exchange says more than anything else that has been said so far. And just as Robyn is about to speak, something unexpected is about to come out that could change everything. Robyn's lips tremble as the silence stretches on, and her fingers grip the edge of the witness stand like it's the only thing keeping her steady. When she finally speaks, her voice is barely above a whisper, but sharp enough to cut through all the assumptions that have been building so far. "I didn't think it would go this far," she says, and as soon as those words leave her mouth, the energy in the room changes completely. This is no longer a simple denial or defense, it sounds like an admission wrapped in fear. Kody's head snaps toward her, and his expression tightens as if he realizes something is slipping beyond his control. "Robyn," he says quietly but urgently, trying to ground her, but the judge raises a hand immediately to silence him. "Brown, what exactly did you think wouldn't go this far?" Robyn takes a shaky breath and looks around the room, avoiding Janelle, Christine, and even Meri. Finally, she stares straight ahead like she's getting ready for something bad to happen. "The money, the land, all of it," she says, and a low but intense whisper spreads through the courtroom like everyone suddenly realizes that this testimony is about to reveal something much deeper. "We were trying to keep things stable," she continues, her voice getting stronger. "Kody said if we didn't shift things around, everything could fall apart." The prosecutor doesn't interrupt or rush her because this is exactly what he's been waiting for. "What do you mean by shift things around?" "Funds, ownership, priorities," Robyn says, and each word hits harder than the last. It's no longer vague, it's clear, it's deliberate, and Kody leans back in his chair, running both hands over his face in frustration. His composure is cracking more than ever before, and Janelle sits completely still, her eyes locked on Robyn now, not angry or surprised, just taking in every word like pieces of a puzzle she's been putting together for years. "Did you ever question these decisions?" "At first, no," she admits. "I believed him. I believed it was for the family." And Christine shifts in her seat, her expression tightening as if that sentence alone confirms everything she's been feeling for so long. "And later?" the prosecutor asks, and Robyn's eyes fill with tears again. "Later, I started to see things weren't equal," she says, her voice breaking on the last word. That one admission hits like a shockwave, because now it's not just Janelle or Christine saying it, it's Robyn herself, the very person who was thought to benefit the most. Kody exhales sharply and shakes his head. "This is being twisted," he mutters again, but his voice is less certain now, less controlled. The judge glances at him briefly before turning back to Robyn. "Can you give an example of what you mean by not equal?" the prosecutor continues, and Robyn closes her eyes for a moment, as if pulling herself back into a memory she can't avoid anymore. There were times when decisions were already made before the rest of the family even knew there was a decision to make, she says, and the courtroom goes completely still again, because that sentence confirms what has been circling the entire trial: secrecy, control, imbalance, and Janelle finally shifts slightly in her seat, not out of discomfort, but as if something inside her has just been validated in a way she never thought it would be. And right here. The truth begins to feel less like accusation and more like undeniable reality. The prosecutor nods slowly, letting the weight of her words settle before asking the next question. And who was involved in making those decisions? And Robyn's eyes open slowly, her gaze drifting toward Kody again, and for a moment it feels like time pauses, like the entire courtroom is holding its breath, waiting to see if she will protect him or expose him. And when she finally speaks, her voice is steadier than before Kody and me, she says, and the reaction is immediate. Christine's eyes widen, Meri's lips part slightly in shock, and Janelle's expression doesn't change, but her silence now feels louder than anything else in the room. Because this is the confirmation she never had. Kody shakes his head more aggressively now. Leaning forward, "That's not what happened," he says, his voice rising despite the judge's earlier warning. "You're making it sound like we planned something. We didn't." But Robyn doesn't look at him this time. She keeps her eyes forward, almost like she's afraid that if she looks at him, she might lose the courage she just found. "We didn't plan to hurt anyone," she says quietly, "but we made choices that did." And that distinction hits harder than a direct accusation, because it carries both guilt and responsibility without trying to escape either, and the prosecutor takes a small step back, giving the moment space to breathe, because there's no need to push further. This is already more than enough. But the defense attorney quickly stands, sensing the danger of letting this narrative settle too deeply. "Ms. Brown," he says, his voice more forceful now, "isn't it true that all financial decisions were made with the goal of keeping the family together?" And Robyn nods slightly. "Yes," she says, "that's what we believed." And the defense attorney seizes that immediately. "So there was no malicious intent?" he asks, trying to steer the narrative back into safer territory, but Robyn hesitates again. And that hesitation says everything before she even speaks. "Intent doesn't change the outcome," she says softly, and the courtroom seems to absorb that sentence in a way that no legal argument can. Counter, because it's simple, it's human, and it's painfully honest. Kody leans back again, this time completely silent. His earlier attempts to control the narrative now replaced by a growing realization that he may not be able to stop what's happening. And Janelle finally looks away from Robyn, her gaze lowering slightly as if she's processing not just the words, but the years behind them. And now, the story isn't just about what was done, it's about why it was allowed to happen for so long. The judge glances at the clock before addressing the room. "We will take a short recess," she announces, her voice firm but measured, and the sudden break feels almost jarring after the intensity of what just unfolded. People begin to move, whispers rise, chairs shift, but the tension doesn't leave. It lingers, heavy and unresolved. Kody immediately turns toward Robyn, leaning in close, his voice low but urgent. "Why would you say that?" he asks, frustration and disbelief mixing in his tone, and Robyn shakes her head slightly, tears still in her eyes. "Because it's true," she says. And that answer seems to hit him harder than anything said in open court. Across the room, Christine exhales slowly, almost like she's been holding her breath for years, while Meri remains seated, her expression distant, as if she's replaying moments from the past in a completely new light. And Janelle stands quietly, stepping away from the table without looking back, her composure intact, but her silence now carrying a different kind of weight. Not uncertainty, not pain, but something closer to closure beginning to form, even if the case itself is far from over. And as the courtroom slowly empties for the recess, one thing becomes clear to everyone watching. This trial is no longer just about proving facts, it's about confronting a truth that none of them can walk away from anymore. And as the doors close and the voices fade, one question lingers in the air. What else has been hidden that hasn't come out yet? The courtroom doors open again after the recess, but the energy that returns with everyone is completely different now. Heavier, sharper, like something fragile has already shattered and no one can pretend otherwise anymore. And as people take their seats, the silence feels more deliberate, more watchful. As if every single person is bracing for what comes next, Kody walks in a few steps behind his attorney. His posture stiffer than before, his jaw clenched tight, and he doesn't look at anyone. Not Robyn, not Janelle, not even the judge, while Robyn follows slowly, her eyes red. Her. Movements hesitant, like she's carrying the weight of what she just said and still trying to understand it herself, Janelle is already seated, calm and composed, but there's a quiet shift in her presence now, something steadier, more resolved, while Christine and Meri sit behind her, both silent. Both deeply affected in ways that are written all over their faces, the judge calls the room to order again, her voice cutting cleanly through the tension, and without wasting time, the prosecutor rises once more, his tone now more precise, more focused, because he knows this is the moment where. Everything must come together, Your Honor. Before the recess, we heard testimony that confirmed a pattern of unequal decision-making and undisclosed financial movements. He begins, pacing slowly, but what we are about to present now goes beyond imbalance. It speaks directly to intent. And that word, intent, lands differently this time, heavier, more dangerous, because now it suggests something deliberate, something calculated. Kody shifts slightly in his seat, his eyes narrowing as if preparing himself for impact. While Robyn looks down, her hands clasped tightly together. And the prosecutor turns toward the evidence table, lifting a thin folder instead of a thick stack, almost as if what's inside doesn't need volume to carry weight. We have obtained a series of private communications, he says, holding it up just enough for the room to see. Messages that were never shared with the rest of the family, and instantly the atmosphere tightens again, like a wire being pulled too far. Kody leans forward, his voice low but tense. What messages? Before anyone starts asking questions, the prosecutor says calmly, turning to Kody. Brown, the prosecutor says calmly, turning to Kody, can you explain what you meant by before anyone starts asking questions? And Kody exhales sharply, shaking his head as if trying to dismiss the entire premise. That could mean anything, he says, his tone defensive. You're taking it out of context. But the prosecutor doesn't react, doesn't argue, he simply signals for the next message. And this time, it's Robyn. Responding, are you sure they won't find out? And that line hits even harder, because now it's no longer one-sided. It's a conversation, a shared awareness of something being hidden. Christine's hand rises slowly to her mouth, her eyes widening as the pieces begin to connect in a way she can't ignore anymore. Meri shifts uncomfortably beside her gaze flickering between the screen and Kody, while Janelle finally blinks, slowly, like the weight of confirmation is settling deeper than she expected. This doesn't prove anything. The defense attorney quickly interjects, stepping forward. These are fragments of a conversation without full context, but the prosecutor nods slightly, almost as if he anticipated that exact response. You're absolutely right, he says, which is why we'll provide the context, and with that, he signals again, and the next message appears. Longer this time, more detailed, and far more damaging. Kody's words laid out clearly. If we restructure it now, it'll be in our favor later. We just need to keep things quiet until it's finalized, and the room reacts immediately. Louder this time, the whispers sharper, more urgent, because now the implication isn't just secrecy. It's strategy. It's planning. It's intent. Kody stands halfway out of his seat, his face flushed with frustration. That's not what that means, he says, his voice rising, but the judge slams the gavel firmly. Sit down, Mr. Brown, she commands, and this time there's no hesitation. Kody sits back down, but his composure is slipping fast, his breathing heavier, his control visibly unraveling. Robyn looks like she might speak, like she wants to say something, but no words come out, and that silence from her now feels louder than any defense she could offer. And in this moment, the courtroom stops questioning whether something happened and starts realizing it may have been planned all along. The prosecutor steps closer to the jury now, his voice lowering slightly, drawing them in. These messages were sent just Days before the ownership structure of Coyote Pass was altered, he explains, an alteration that significantly reduced Ms. Janelle Brown's stake without her informed consent, and that connection, clear, direct, undeniable, lands with a finality that shifts the entire case. Janelle finally exhales, a slow, controlled breath, her eyes closing briefly as if absorbing not just the evidence, but the years behind it, while Christine shakes her head slightly, disbelief and validation mixing together in a way that's almost overwhelming. Meri looks down at her hands, her expression distant, like she's replaying every conversation she once thought she understood. And the defense attorney steps forward again, his tone more urgent now, more aggressive. Because he knows the ground is slipping, Your Honor, we cannot allow selective interpretation of private messages to define intent. He argues there is no direct statement here of wrongdoing, but the prosecutor doesn't interrupt, doesn't argue immediately. He simply walks back to the table, picks up the final document in the folder, and turns back toward the room. You're right, he says again, there is no direct statement. Until now, and with that he places the document on the screen, and this time it's not a message, it's a signed agreement. 1. That none of the other wives have seen before. One that clearly outlines a contingency plan, a clause that transfers full control of specific assets under certain conditions. Conditions that, until this moment, no one even knew existed. The room falls completely silent. Not even whispers now. Just a heavy, suffocating stillness as everyone reads the document in disbelief. Janelle's eyes move slowly across the page, her expression finally shifting, not to anger, not to sadness, but to something deeper, something final. Because this isn't suspicion anymore, this is proof. Christine leans forward, her voice barely audible as she whispers, I've never seen that before, and Meri shakes her head slightly, her lips parting but no words coming out. Robyn stares at the document like she's seeing it for the first time too, her face pale, her breathing shallow, and Kody doesn't move at all. He just sits there, staring straight ahead, his expression frozen in a way that says more than any denial ever could. And right here, everything changes. Not just the case, but the entire story they've been telling for years. The judge looks down at the document, her expression tightening as she processes what's in front of her, and when she finally looks up, there's a shift in her tone as well. Something more serious, more decisive. Mr. Brown, she says firmly, you will have the opportunity to respond to this. And Kody nods slowly, but there's no immediate response, no quick defense, no confident explanation, just silence. And that silence feels louder than anything else in the room, because for the first time since this trial began, it doesn't feel like he has an answer ready. The prosecutor steps back, allowing the weight of the evidence to settle fully. Because there's nothing more to say right now. The documents speak for themselves, the messages speak for themselves, the pattern, the intent, the secrecy, it's all there, laid out in a way that can't be easily dismissed or explained away. And as the courtroom sits in that heavy, unbroken silence, one realization becomes impossible to ignore. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It wasn't just imbalance. It was something much more deliberate, much more controlled. And as the judge prepares to move the proceedings forward, the question that now hangs over everyone isn't whether the truth will come out, but how much more of it is still hidden beneath everything they've already seen. And just as Kody finally leans forward, opening his mouth to respond, the tension reaches its peak, because whatever he says next could either explain everything or destroy what little remains of his defense. Kody leans forward slowly, his hands pressing against the table as if he needs something solid to hold on to, and for a moment it feels like the entire courtroom is suspended in time, every eye locked on him, waiting for the explanation that could either rebuild everything or tear it apart. Completely, his jaw tightens, his eyes flick briefly toward Robyn, then toward Janelle, and finally he speaks, his voice lower than before but carrying a sharp edge of desperation. You're making this into something it's not, he says, shaking his head slightly. That agreement, that was Contingency plan, nothing more, and the prosecutor doesn't move, doesn't interrupt, he simply watches, letting Kody speak. Because sometimes the most revealing thing is what someone says when they're trying to defend themselves. We were trying to protect the family, Kody continues. His tone. Growing more forceful, there were risks, financial risks, and I had to make decisions to make sure everything didn't collapse, but even as he says it, there's a subtle crack in his delivery, like the confidence isn't fully there anymore, like he's trying to convince himself just as much as. Everyone else, Janelle listens without reacting, her face calm but her eyes sharp, absorbing every word, while Christine leans slightly forward, her expression tense, and Meri remains still, her gaze distant, as if she's measuring every sentence against years of memories that suddenly feel different. The prosecutor finally steps forward, his voice calm but firm. A contingency plan that no one else knew about? He asks, and that question lands with precision, forcing Kody into a corner he can't easily step out of. It wasn't finalized. Kody replies quickly, it was just a precaution. But the prosecutor tilts his head slightly, and yet it was signed, he says, gesturing toward the document still. Displayed on the screen, and the weight of that truth hangs heavily in the air, Kody exhales sharply, running a hand through his hair, his frustration becoming more visible with each passing second. Because that's how these things work, he says, his voice rising slightly. You prepare for worst case scenarios, but the prosecutor doesn't let go. Worst case scenario for who? He asks, and that question hits deeper than anything before, because it forces a perspective that Kody has been avoiding this entire time. There's a pause, a long one, and for the first time, Kody doesn't have an immediate answer. His eyes shift again, this time lingering on Janelle just a second. Too long, and in that moment, something unspoken passes between them. Years of trust, years of belief, and the quiet realization of what it all meant, and right here, the truth begins to feel less like a legal argument and more like a personal reckoning. The defense attorney quickly steps in. Sensing the danger of the silence, Your Honor, my client has already stated that his intentions were to protect the family as a whole, he says, his tone controlled but urgent. We cannot ignore the context of a plural marriage, where financial decisions are inherently complex, but the prosecutor turns slightly toward the jury, his expression steady. Complexity does not excuse concealment, he replies, and that single line cuts through the defense like a blade. Christine exhales slowly, almost like she's been holding that exact thought for years, while Meri's hands tighten in. Her lap, her knuckles whitening slightly, and Robyn sits frozen, her eyes fixed on the table, unable to look up, unable to escape the weight of what's unfolding. The judge leans forward slightly, her gaze focused on Kody now. Mr. Brown, she says, her tone measured but firm. I'm going to ask you directly. Did you intentionally withhold information about these financial decisions from the other parties involved? And the question lands with absolute clarity, stripping away all ambiguity, all interpretation, leaving only a yes or no, and the silence that follows feels suffocating. Kody's breathing becomes more noticeable, his chest rising and falling as he processes the weight of the moment. And for A. Second, it almost seems like he might finally say it, finally admit something real, but then his expression hardens slightly, and he shakes his head. No, he says, his voice firm but not as strong as it once was. I didn't withhold anything intentionally, and that word, intentionally, hangs in the air because it creates just enough space for doubt, just enough room for interpretation. The prosecutor nods slowly, as if expecting that exact answer, and then he takes a step back, allowing the statement to settle before delivering the next move. Then perhaps, he says calmly, we should hear from someone who witnessed these decisions from a different perspective, and the room shifts again. Anticipation building as everyone wonders who could possibly add more to what has already been revealed. The prosecutor glances toward the back of the courtroom, and for a moment, there's confusion. until a figure stands, someone unexpected, someone who hasn't been part of the narrative so far, and as they begin to walk forward, the tension spikes instantly. Because this isn't just another family member, this is someone who was never supposed to be involved, someone who exists outside thee. Emotional dynamics of the Brown family, someone who deals only in facts, numbers, and truth. Your Honor, the prosecutor says, we call the financial consultant who oversaw the restructuring process. And the reaction is immediate. Kody's head snaps toward the witness, his eyes widening slightly. Robyn looks up for the first time in several minutes, her expression shifting from fear to something closer to shock. And Janelle straightens subtly in her seat, her focus sharpening even more. Because this is the piece that could connect everything. The witness takes the stand calmly. Professionally, their demeanor completely different from the emotional intensity that has dominated the room so far, and after taking the oath, they sit, placing a folder neatly in front of them. Can you state your role in relation to the financial restructuring of Coyote Pass? The witness nods when the prosecutor asks, were all parties equally informed of the changes being made? They say, I was hired to advise on asset allocation and ownership structuring, and their tone is neutral and precise. Immediately, the courtroom feels the shift, from emotion to fact, from feeling to evidence. And the witness pauses briefly, not out of hesitation, but out of careful consideration, no, they say, and that single word lands with more weight than any emotional testimony so far. Because it's objective, it's detached, it's undeniable, Kody shakes his head again, more aggressively now. That's not accurate, he says, but his voice lacks the authority it once had. The witness remains calm, unfazed. I can only speak to the communications I was part of, they reply, and in those communications, the primary decision makers were Mr. Brown and Miss Robyn Brown, and the confirmation hits like a final blow. Christine closes her eyes briefly, Meri looks down again, and Janelle finally exhales, a slow, steady breath that feels like the release of something she's been holding on to for far too long, and now the story is no longer built on accusations or interpretations. It stands on undeniable confirmation. The prosecutor steps closer, his voice steady but carrying the weight of everything that has been revealed. Were there any instructions given regarding how these decisions should be communicated to the rest of the family? He asks, and the witness nods slightly, opening the folder in front of them. Yes, they say. There were specific instructions to delay full disclosure until after the restructuring was complete, and the courtroom erupts into a wave of whispers again, louder than before, because this isn't just implication anymore, it's direct evidence of intent. Kody leans back in his chair, his face pale now, his earlier confidence completely gone, replaced by something much closer to realization, while Robyn covers her mouth, tears spilling again, but this time they feel different. Not defensive. Not reactive, but something closer to guilt, and the judge raises her gavel, calling for order, but even as the room quiets, the tension doesn't fade. It intensifies. Because everyone knows that this moment changes everything, the defense attorney stands again, clearly under pressure now, Your Honor. We will need to review these claims in detail, he says, but his voice carries a strain that wasn't there before, and the judge nods slightly, her expression serious. You will have that opportunity, she says. But for now, this testimony stands, and that finality settles over the courtroom like a heavy weight. Because there's no immediate way to undo what has just been said, no quick explanation that can erase the clarity of it, and as the witness steps down, as the prosecutor returns to his table, and as Kody sits there in silence, staring at nothing, one thing becomes painfully clear. To everyone present, this case is no longer about whether something wrong happened. It's about how deep it goes, how long it's been happening, and who truly knew about it all along. And as the judge prepares to adjourn for the day, one final question lingers in the air, if this much has already been revealed. What could possibly be left that's even more shocking than this?